Hey, what's up everyone? This is MusicTechHelpGuy, and iZotope Ozone 12 just dropped today, and I'm a big fan of Ozone. I use it just about every day in my mixing and mastering workflow, so I'm really excited to dive into all of the new features in Ozone 12. So first, let me just give you a quick flyover of the 6 main new features, and then I'll dive into each one in more detail. The first and most obvious update is that Ozone 12 has an updated user interface. There's a new custom Master Assistant workflow that allows you to determine upfront what plugins you want in your Master Assistant chains. So essentially, this allows you to feed the Master Assistant some information in advance about the target genre and target loudness and intensity of the effects up front, so you can get a better result with Mastering Assistant. There are 3 new plugin modules: bass control to add drive, punch, and balance to your low-end frequencies; Unlimiter, which is like the opposite of a limiter. It reintroduces lost dynamics and is really going to be a great plugin for remastering work, especially when you don't have the original stems, multi-tracks, or the original pre-mastered version of a track. This can allow you to get some dynamics back from limited tracks. And Stem EQ, which allows you to separately control and EQ vocals, bass, drums, and other instruments in real time. With these 3 new plugin modules, this brings the total number of modules in Ozone up to 20, or 21 if you include the actual Ozone plugin itself. And lastly, you can get even louder and clearer limiting out of Ozone's maximizer with the IRC5 maximizer mode. Okay, so let's jump right into this and check out all of these updates in more detail. I am using Logic Pro 11.2 and I'm using Ozone 12 Advanced. If you want to see what modules and features are included with each version of Ozone 12, you can compare all the versions over at the iZotope website, and I'll link to that below. Okay, first let's take a quick look at the new user interface. On the left, you're looking at Ozone 11. On the right, you are looking at Ozone 12. The first main difference that I'm seeing is Ozone 12 has more shading to it, and the elements are a little bit more 3D looking. I also like that when you select a module, it highlights it in blue now instead of just this flat gray look. All of the controls that are like knob controls in 11, they're sort of like a fill knob. When you pull it up, the knob is getting filled up, right? It's basically the same thing as a slider, but just in, circular form, I guess. But in Ozone 12, they've just turned these into standard turn knobs. And they also have a bit more of a 3D look to them. They kind of pop off of the page a little bit better. So I think a lot of people will prefer this format over this format, especially if you are learning some of these parameters with, knobs on your MIDI controller. Another one that I'm really happy that they added that's just, again, a little easier on the eyes is when you select a new module, you get this new sort of pop-up dialog where they separate the core, modern, and vintage modules, whereas in version 11, it's just a big, long list. Obviously, as they add more and more modules to Ozone, this list is just going to get longer and longer, and so this seems like a total no-brainer here, so that's great. Most of the modules look roughly the same inside, so you're not going to get lost. It's just that things look a little bit more 3D now and a little less flat. Now, one thing that they haven't fixed, and I don't know whether this is actually a Logic issue or an Ozone issue, is that when you open up the preset menu, what tends to happen, it ends up showing up behind the plugin, and I think that might be a Logic issue. It would be great if they could find a way to make this always show up on top of the plugin. And I think what really the issue is here is that when you select the plugin, it's now in focus. So then when you click on the preset menu, it shows up behind the plugin rather than on top of the plugin. There's got to be a way to make the preset menu show up on top always. There's got to be a way to do it. So that's like my one little critique of the UIs. They still haven't fixed that issue. But otherwise, overall, I'm really liking the new look of Ozone 12. All right, next up, I want to show you the new custom Mastering Assistant workflow in Ozone 12. But in order to do that, I want to show you what this looks like in Ozone 11 first. So Mastering Assistant, you can get to by clicking here, What this does is you play a large portion of your song. What Ozone will do is it will automatically come up with a mastering preset for you using certain modules. It always uses certain modules. It doesn't use all of the modules. And then once it's done, you can choose different, targets. Maybe let's choose EDM here. Not a whole lot of targets to choose from, but you do have some macro controls here if you prefer to work this way. Obviously, if you're doing serious mastering work, you prefer to just go into each of the modules and, customize them yourself. But I often find, with Ozone, I don't really use impact very much, and I don't use the stabilizer all that much. And, maybe I want to use a third-party limiter, so maybe I don't want the maximizer in there. And so in a lot of cases, I end up removing those modules and then just dialing in my own mastering chain this way. And you can certainly still do that in Ozone 12. But in Ozone 12, you get some more controls. So let's go ahead and pull up version 12 here. So now when I go to the mastering assistant, there's two options. We have Auto Master and Custom. So Auto Master is going to do the exact same thing that Ozone 11 did that I just showed you. But if you go to Custom, now what you can do is you can choose your target up front. And so it will take into account that genre in the processing that it applies. So let's go with like maybe electro pop. You can also choose in advance what plugins you actually want in your plugin chain. So again, I'll take out impact. I'll take out the stabilizer. If you're using a third-party limiter instead of the maximizer, you can also pull that out as well. You can disable all. You can enable all. So let's pull out stabilizer and impact. And then you can set your loudness target. Let's maybe do something a little more conservative, like -10. Maybe I want my output ceiling to be -1, and let's use a true peak. In addition to that, you can set the intensity. You can set this to subtle, transparent, balanced, bold, or transformative. Let's use bold. And then you can choose the analysis time. How long is it going to listen to your song? And you can also make this like a musical time. So I could say 4 bars, 8 bars, 16 bars. And then you can also save this setting as your default setting for Mastering Assistant if you like. So maybe you're working on an album and you need different mastering settings for each song, but you kind of want to have the same starting point. This is a great way to do that. So let's go ahead and click Start Assistant and play a good chunk of the song. This song is one of my originals. This is called Speed of Light. You can check out the music video here on YouTube, and I'll link to that below. So let's give this a listen and run it through Mastering Assistant.
Break the speed of light with the moonlight plays in shades of blue, shadows dancing hearts in tune. And if you're perfect, break the speed of light. Break the speed.
Okay, and just so I don't blow out all of your ears, I'm going to turn on the gain match so you're not hearing all of the added loudness from the maximizer. So, of course, you can go back to the Mastering Assistant and you can fine-tune your master using the macro controls. But again, if you're doing serious mastering work, you're going to go into each of these modules individually. And what it's done is it's taken that information that I fed it on input, and it's given me a mastering setting here, a mastering chain that works, and it's omitted the modules that I don't like to use, which I think is really handy. Let's maybe add a touch more vocal, and then, yeah, let's give this a listen. I'll bypass it a couple of times so you can get an idea of what the Mastering Assistant is doing here.
Break the speed of light with the moonlight plays in shades of blue, shadows dancing hearts in tune, and the air goes fast where time stands still.
Yeah, so it's, it's really boxy before. We're really bringing out the top end, the clarity. Let's dial back this EQ a little bit. I also want some of my bass back, so let's bring that back in. Let's go into the imager. I'm more of a fan of a little more the spacing. I like it more like this. I am more of a very like bass mono kind of guy. I like my mid-range kind of spread a bit. And then the vocal range, I can go either way. I do like big, wide vocals, but sometimes you end up with the situations where the vocals are getting canceled out in mono. So in some situations, I may actually make this range a little bit more mono, but let's check the correlation meter and make that adjustment.
Break the speed of light with the moonlight plays in shades of blue. Shadows dancing, hearts in tune. And the echoes best where time stands still. Words meet. Take me to the place where words cannot go. Where the silence leaves tonight.
Yeah, and I pulled those down just to give the top end a little more focus. And then I absolutely love the clarity module. This was an update in one of the previous versions, but really helps to bring out the detail and the top end clarity.
Break the speed of light with the moonlight plays in shades of blue. Shadows dancing, hearts in tune. And the echoes best where time stands still. Words meet. Take me to the place where words cannot go. Where the silence leaves tonight. And if you're perfect, break the speed of light. Break the speed of light.
Okay, so that is the new updated custom mastering assistant workflow. Let's move on to some of the new modules. Okay, so next up, I want to show you the new bass control module. Bass control gives you a balance knob, which sort of adjusts the contour of the bass relative to everything else in the track based on what your cutoff frequency is set to. So everything below the cutoff is information that bass control is going to be affecting. So let's give this track a listen as is, and then watch what happens as I roll up the bass balance. So I used to use the low-end focus module for this, but I think I'm going to be using bass control for this moving forward. But occasionally you'll get a track where there's just not enough bass. Like the bass tone sounds good. The bass instruments, you know, whether it be bass guitar or synthesizers like here, the tone might be nice, but the balance is off. And so if you have a master you're working on that doesn't have enough bass, you just roll this up. If it's maybe too bass heavy, you can roll it back. And there are meters here to kind of give you an approximation of where those bass levels should be. And of course, if you want to set the cutoff frequency to something else, you can. I do recommend listening to your track with the cutoff frequency soloed so you can get an idea of what's in that register. Now, in addition to a bass balance control, there's a bass punch control, which will add more impact to the bass transients. And I do recommend you listen to this with, or at least with large enough speakers where the bass is actually going to come through, or listening with a sub. Additionally, you have a sustain power and peak control. Sustain power is going to push up the level of the sustained part of the bass, and peak control is going to push down any unwanted transients. I don't think I'm going to be using the peak control for this particular example, but I will show you another example in just a bit where we use peak control. So each of these have their own thresholds. So with sustain power, the threshold is sort of like where you want the sustain level to be. So as you add sustain power, you'll see the sustained portions of the bass be pulled up closer to the sustain power threshold. In fact, let's go somewhere where the bass is a bit more smooth so we can see that. So not only is the tail end of each kick drum getting a bit of a boost, so is the bass guitar there. Let's give that one more listen. Yeah, it's a night and day difference. I'm like really feeling the bass now. So peak control does exactly what it sounds like. It's going to control the bass transients. Although generally speaking, you don't want your peak control threshold to be lower than your sustain power threshold. And for both of these, there are different tone colors, dirty or clean. I'm going to go ahead and just turn off peak control now, and I'll show you the difference between dirty and clean. But to do that, I'm going to go ahead and just delta this so you can just hear the added information from bass control. So if you were trying to beef up the sustain of, say, a rock or metal track, the dirty color might sound great there. For this example, I think I'm going to stick to clean, but this is completely a genre thing and a matter of personal taste, whether you want more saturation on your bass or less saturation on your bass. And let's give this a listen one more time, and I'll bypass the plugin a few times. Yeah, much better focus and impact. The bottom end actually sounds like it's properly supporting the rest of the track. And there's a nice balance between the bass content and non-bass content. Like I said, the low-end focus module was pretty good, but bass control takes this to a whole new level with control over the envelope and saturation of the bass. So really loving this new module. Now, one more thing I want to show you with bass control is how you can use it as a dynamic and tone shaping control for bass guitar and bass synth parts. So depending on which version of Ozone you have, I have the advanced version, and in this version, I can open up each of the modules as separate plugins. And while bass control is very impressive as a bass control module for mastering, It is incredible as a bass guitar tone shaping control. So let's give this bass guitar a listen. It's just a DI bass. There's no compression on it, and I'm just running it through Bass Amp Designer in Logic. There's a lot of like slap to it. It's just the player's hand landing back on the bass strings. And so the balance control is really helpful for this, because if you pull this up, you're going to get more body and bass tone and less of the frequencies above the cutoff frequency, which you can adjust right here. So when you pull this up, it's going to sort of control the contour of the bass. We're going to hear more bass and less of that clicky, slappy noise. And it'll also take areas like this that are a little higher up on the fretboard and don't have as much bass and reinforce those with more bass. And then you can dial in the punch, sustain power, and peak control to taste. Just make sure that your sustain power threshold is below the threshold of your peak control. Otherwise, the peak control can start cutting into your added sustain. So you're going to get more consistency out of your bass parts, although you may still find yourself wanting to throw another compressor on after the bass control plugin. Okay, so next up I have a metal track here. This is from my band Right Stripped from our 2021 album Daylight into Darkness. This is the title track. Before I jump into some of these other modules, I want to show you another example of bass control. Yeah, you've got to have some bass reinforcement in there. Otherwise, those guitar riffs just sound thin, you know? Next up, let's check out the Unlimiter. And the Unlimiter, we can find down here at the bottom of the modern category. Now, I'm really not quite sure where I should put the Unlimiter. I feel like this should be something like that's added toward the beginning of the chain, because the Unlimiter works the exact opposite of the way a limiter works. A limiter will take your peak transients and tame them down and set them, you know, below a certain threshold. And with the Unlimiter, you can add transients back. You can add dynamics back. So with a track like this, even just looking at the waveform, you can see it's pretty flat in terms of its dynamics. So, you know, whether you are restoring a track that doesn't have any dynamics or remastering a track that already has a limiter on it or some heavy bus compression, which I think is the case here, we can get some of those dynamics back. So let's give this a shot. Basically, you just play the track, set your threshold. You can learn the threshold, and then you can set an input and an output gain. Most likely what I'll be doing is pulling back the output gain in order to, you know, make room for those transients. So a track like this, maybe the input gain needs a little more volume, but as you pull the threshold down, it's going to start hitting these peaks and it's going to start adding content back in. Yeah, I really like what it's doing to those, like when the double bass is in and it's it's really bringing out those fills. It's almost like using it like this, it's almost like a transient drum enhancer. And when I've used it on a limited track, what I end up doing is I end up keeping the input gain at 0, and then I end up rolling down the output gain because, we're adding volume, we're adding peaks to this that are higher than the original track. So you have to dial back the output gain to match that, to make sure that you don't just go from a loud track to a clipping track, so you have to bring the overall volume down. So Unlimiter, a really great option if you need to bring out the punch in drums, bring out some more of the transient dynamics, but also an incredible like remastering tool or restoration tool if you're working with tracks that don't have any dynamics or already have heavy bus compression or heavy limiting on them, and you don't have the ability to go back to the original multi-tracks or the original stems. Lastly, in terms of new plugins, let's check out the new stem EQ. Let's put this after bass control. Yeah, let's put this after bass control. You may be tempted to put it a little bit sooner, but what stem EQ does is it gives you 4 different independent EQs, one for the vocals, one for the bass, one for the drums, and one for other. So in my case here, other is going to be like strings and guitar. And so this is really great if you feel like a certain instrument needs a little bit of a different tone to it. With all of these like stem separation tools that are out there, you're not going to get a perfect result no matter what you do. When I solo just the drums, you're going to hear more than just the drums. There's going to be some noise in there. But for example, maybe that snare drum, I want a little more thwack to it. I want a little bit more body to the snare. I can sort of try to EQ, pinpoint and EQ those snare frequencies just in the drum stem. And it may look like I'm making these like giant changes, but I'm really not. The display here only goes to +4, although you can change that. You can go higher than that. And then if you need to trim that stem, you can. If I need to pull back the drums a little bit to compensate for that added EQ, I can. So let's hear that in and out of the mix here. Yeah, so we're getting a little bit more, some mid-range tones in the drums. Let's go to other. Let's see if we can maybe make these guitars kind of come out a little bit more. They're kind of buried. I think the mistake here with stem EQ in terms of the way people will use it is I think people will expect like night and day differences out of it, but what you get are these like little subtle changes that are not like massive changes. But here, again, I'm getting a little more of that mid-range, mid-range content in the drums, a little bit more mid-range and low-end content to thicken up the guitars as well. And again, these changes may look like drastic changes on screen, but we're only adding 2 dB of gain here in this example. And you can do the same thing here for the bass as well. I've got that taken care of with the bass control plugin, so I don't need that. And then let's go to vocals. Let's maybe bring out the vocals a little bit, maybe the 1 to 2K range.
With each dying breath, we strive to unify. In our selfish despair, we fall and burn alive. Through this hell we fear, to will we find a way. To end this madness, we create day by day. It's a trying time for humanity. Tide. Greed spreads like a plague, infecting all we see. Drifting in a sea of dissolution.
Again, it's a very subtle difference, and if you're not hearing things, you can always click the Delta button, and that'll reveal exactly what's being added to the signal.
Selfish despair, we fall and burn alive. Through this hell we feel, to will we find a way. To end this madness, we create day by day. It's a trying time for humanity. Tide. Greed spreads like a plague, infecting all we see. Drifting in a sea of dissolution. Defiantly we wage a war amongst ourselves, searching for some relief from this.
So yeah, this is doing a great job of giving this track a bit of a lift, bringing out some frequencies that seem a little flat, bringing out some of the drum dynamics that seem a bit flat, bringing out the bass punch and really making it fill the bottom end so the guitars don't sound, hollow and don't, feel like they don't have any support under them. And then of course you can add your mastering limiter to this. You can add the maximizer. So let's go ahead and find the maximizer. I'm going to turn on gain match for now, just so I don't blow out your ears. And there is a new maximizer mode, IRC5, which is supposed to be louder and cleaner. So let's just dial in a maximizer here that works.
It's a trying time for humanity. Tide. Greed spreads like a plague, infecting all we see. Drifting in a sea of dissolution. Defiantly we wage a war against ourselves.
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of the soft clip in here. It really helps to, especially with rock music, just beefs things up a bit. Let's bring in the transient emphasis. There's an upward compressor here, so you can add some upward dynamics on your at the limiter stage as well. And I'm going to make the transients and sustain have the transients have a little bit less independence, and the sustain I want to have less independence, and the transients to have more, just so transients that are panned, like the toms, for example, aren't all being affected the same way.
With each dying breath, we strive to unify. In our selfish despair, we fall and burn alive.
And let's check out our metering options. Let's grab integrated loudness, because I want to see what the actual loudness level is at. So here's your LUFS or LUFS Typically, I'm, shooting for around -10-ish. But, the song is going to determine, what the loudness is actually going to be. Something like this, I might even go a little louder, like -9 or so. And just to give you guys fair warning, in order to set the final loudness level, I am now going to turn off the gain match. So you're going to hear the full loudness of this track, and it will likely be quite a bit louder than my voice. So this is just a warning. Drop your volume level now.
With each dying breath, we strive to unify. In our selfish despair, we fall and burn alive. Through this hell we feel, don't will we find a way to end this madness we create day by day. It's a running time for humanity. Greed spreads like a plague, infecting all we see. Drifting in a sea of dissolution. Oh, defiantly we wage a war amongst ourselves, searching for some relief from this constant insanity. While corruption still spreads, turning daylight into darkness.
And as you saw me do there, typically what I do is after I add the limiter, I go back to the other plugins in the signal chain and make sure that these are dialed in a way that makes the limiter sound as good as possible. Because as you could hear there, the top end got a little kind of brittle sounding with the maximizer when I added gain with the maximizer. So I went back into the stem EQ and the clarity module and kind of made it a little more mid-range focused, just because that mid-top end was starting to sound a little brittle sounding there. Let's go ahead just for demonstration purposes, and I'm going to delta the limiter, and let's go through all 5 of the IRC modes. And I'll use like balanced for IRC3, and I'll use, modern for IRC4, just so you can hear the difference between these 4 maximizer modes.
With each dying breath, we strive to unify. In our selfish despair, we fall.
And by the way, what I should mention here, what you're hearing with Delta turned on is you're hearing the distortion, the noise that's being added because of the limiter. There's no such thing as a 100% clean limiter, but I think what you'll find is that you're going to hear less signal, less distortion with IRC 4 and 5 than you do with IRC 1 and 2. And in some cases, that might be what you want. In rock and metal, it's not unheard of to use IRC 1 or 2 because they're a little more noisy on the transients. Sometimes that added distortion actually gives the drums a little bit more impact. So let's go ahead and listen through these.
With each dying breath, we strive to unify. In our selfish despair, we fall and burn alive. Through this hell we feel, don't will we find a way to end this madness we with each dying breath, we strive to unify. In our selfish despair, we fall and burn alive. Through this hell we feel, don't will we find a way to end this madness.
Yeah, you can really hear with IRC5 that the added distortion it's less mid-rangey, it's more high frequency, and so therefore it's going to sort of blend into the natural transients in the track rather than being like a noticeable distortion that's added to it. In fact, 3 and 5 at least in this example, seemed the cleanest sounding to my ear. But of course, 3 and 4 also have different modes. So different modes are going to give you different results. So that's certainly something to check if your goal is like maximum loudness. Check each one of these modes and see which one gives you the least amount of added distortion. That's going to be the one that's going to make your track the loudest when you turn off that delta. And in Ozone 12, IRC 5 is most likely going to be the cleanest or one of the cleanest modes, depending on, you know, your track or your application. All right, guys, so those are the new modules and new features in iZotope's Ozone 12. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. If you're interested in getting into music production using Logic Pro, that's composing, recording, editing, and mixing your own music, head over to logicproguide.com and check out one of my full-length courses. Most of my course content is available here on YouTube to watch for free, but if you buy the course from my website, you also get to download all of the videos completely ad-free, and they also come with demo projects and multi-track sessions so you can work along with the lessons. As always, thank you so much for the support, and thanks for watching.